Hi, my name is Steve Ward and I'm a pre-sales consultant working for Emerson. In this slide deck, I'm going to go through how we create a bill of materials for our Movicon software, and I'm going to focus on Movicon.NExT, and this applies to version 4.3 and the latest, which is 4.4. First, a safety moment. Emerson is very concerned with safety at a corporate level, at an individual level, for our workers and for our clients and for all our customers. Stay safe by reviewing your working environment for issues before you start work, and adopt this as something you do continuously. You're empowered to stop work if you consider conditions to be unsafe, and then get the condition rectified. Either rectify yourself if it's appropriate, or find someone who can rectify it for you. Report issues and near misses. Near misses because we're not just concerned with things that did cause a safety issue, but possible things that might have caused an issue, and then that can help us prevent those issues in future. And take care of these 12 life-saving behaviours that Emerson recommends. Now, I do have a detailed training deck that covers Movicon in more detail, but let's quickly review the structure of the way Movicon works. So we start with .NExT, which is a protocol gateway. This can be extended to include logical and local visualization with WebHMI using a web browser. And those two components are also available with PackEdge, which is our edge computing and machine learning solution for edge and IoT applications. Moving to the right, we have Movicon.NExT, which is the Windows-based supervisory platform using the Windows presentation framework for graphics. And this includes options for augmented reality, as well as a web client for remote visualization. And then we can add on lean manufacturing and energy analytics with Pro.Lean and Pro.Energy. Now, the way the product structure works, we start off with an editor. The editor allows you to design once and then deploy everywhere using the same editor for all of the different applications. So .NExT, WebHMI, Movicon.NExT, Pro.Lean, Pro.Energy, web clients, all configured using the same application, and then we deploy from that application to our target device. So for WebHMI, we have runtime licenses. These consist of a server and a web server, and visualization is using a browser. We have Linux and Windows versions going from 50 tags upwards, and this is ideal for embedded devices which don't have much power, and they can benefit from running Linux, which has very few computing requirements. Moving up, we have runtime licenses for OEMs. This is a cut down version of Movicon.NExT, and they are restricted for bulk OEM purchasers, but they're a great way of getting some of the Emerson Movicon benefits, but without paying for the full license. But there are restrictions. These would typically run on a full-blown Windows computer using a panel PC or an industrial PC. Then we have Movicon.NExT, which has a distributed client-server architecture, combining server licenses and client licenses, again running on Windows using IPCs and servers, and there's also a possibility for multiple different client types as well. There's also the Runtime HMI SCADA Pro, which is a client server combined in a single device, and this includes both the server and the client, and we have multiple capabilities there from 50 tags upwards. And then we also support web clients with no local license using a HTML5 web browser. So there's multiple options there: WebHMI, OEMs, client and separate server license, runtime client and server license, and web clients. And web clients also includes mobile devices. Now, Movicon covers a wide range of features and benefits, and it allows us to tick all the boxes when we are implementing applications. So we've got low entry prices with small tag count versions. An important thing to note there is we only count IO tags. So if it's data coming from a PLC, we count it, but if it's an internal value, it's not counted. So calculations, data logging, other things that you're doing inside Movicon which aren't associated with a direct IO tag, they're all free of charge. We have a wide range of PLC protocols, not just for Emerson PLCs, but also covering a wide range of third-party PLCs and other devices, including telemetry and IoT type applications. Now, Movicon 4 was rewritten in 2020, and it's got a very modern editor and development environment, which makes it very up to date, both from a usage point of view, but also from the underlying technology point of view. And that's represented by great graphics, and we have a wide range of impressive demonstrations which make it easy to show the capabilities of Movicon, and they also apply across multiple industries, and we've got multiple industry demonstrations as well, and you can check those out on our Software Experience Hub. We have very flexible clients. We've got a Runtime or FIT client, we support web clients, we support mobile clients, we support terminal services and RDP, so there's a wide range of connectivity to access the data that's on the server, including also things like an alarm dispatcher to send alarms to remote devices, and also a very good reporting package. We have a common editor, so the same editor across .NExT for OPCUA data server, for WebHMI for web visualization, and for the full-blown Movicon.NExT. And the great thing is, as Emerson, we can be a single vendor for the PLC, the I/O, the industrial PC or panel PC, and the visualization. And the benefit of that is a single purchase order, single supply chain, and no integration issues, because we make sure all of this equipment works with each other, and we can provide all of the technical support to get it working without having to go to multiple places. There are time-limited demonstrations available. In fact, with the developer, that will run for 2 hours at a time free of charge to allow you to evaluate the software and even start developing before your license has arrived. The base packages include many features, for example, reports, recipes, data logging, all included without having to buy any extras, including simple database logging to SQL databases. As I mentioned, we've got a built-in reporting package. With many other HMI SCADAs, there's either no reporting option, or you have to go to some third-party application, or you might be relying on what the database gives you for reporting. But with Movicon, we've got a very advanced built-in reporting packages for SQL and for current data. Then we can offer lots of options on top of Movicon, such as redundant servers, alarm dispatcher to send alarms to mobile users. We have 3D graphics support, we've got GeoSCADA, and we've got AR. We've also got the options for Pro.Energy and Pro.Lean, which are add-ins using nice analytical tools which give you predefined dashboards and reports, as well as lots of customizability for lean manufacturing and for energy efficiency applications. We automatically support cloud operation and virtualization, so that allows Movicon to run anywhere, either on your local computer, on your corporate central computers, or in the cloud, all supported. And Movicon is easy to quote. It's all based on part numbers, so it's very simple to build together a bill of materials for the parts you want and then convert that into a quotation. So I have a feature comparison here that shows a comparison of some of the different options. This is probably too dense for you to read because I'm recording this and I don't know what resolution you'll get, but we have a products code document, or you can contact Emerson for further details on all these different options. One of the key points is that many features are included as standard. You get a large symbol library and toolbox, you get the ability to create power templates, alarm management and viewers are built in, historical event viewers are built in, we have multi-language support, we support speech recognition and text-to-speech, recipes is included, user and password management including Active Directory or domain integration is supported, we have those reports I mentioned, and you also get a wide range of basic and automation drivers as standard, including OPCUA, Modbus, and drivers for the majority of standard PLCs. From a client point of view, you might want to know which client to use. Well, if you're using a standalone Movicon.NExT system, then that's fine, because you would run the server and client on the same computer, and that uses the standard Runtime client, which is based on Windows Presentation Framework. That Runtime client can also be run remotely and connecting via your local area network or a wide area network, and this gives you the best quality graphics and the highest performance. It's a fit client, and that means that screens are rendered natively on your local computer using an optimized graphics format. And this is recommended for operators and full-time workers and people who want the best graphics experience. We also have support for options such as 3D graphics, GeoSCADA and multi-touch. Some of those are extra options. Multi-touch, for example, though, is included as standard. Now, because it's a runtime client, it does need installing locally, so you may need more licenses. So if you want to look at concurrent operations, then we can also use a net license, and a net license allows us to have distributed licenses from a network server. But as before, for many people who will be using this full time, they would more likely have their own dedicated workstation, and in that case, a dedicated license is fully appropriate. We can also support a web client. This uses a HTML5 browser, and the screens are rendered using a content of HTML5, CSS and JavaScript, and this is ideal for casual users who don't maybe need the full performance and all the capabilities of the runtime client. There's no local install, there's no local license used, so this is great because concurrent licenses can reduce the cost. So for example, you might have 10 users using the web client, but you only pay for the number of active users. So there might be 10 people in total, but if only 5 of those will ever be involved in viewing graphics at any one time, you only need to buy 5 licenses. If you're using WebHMI, that always uses a web client, and typically with WebHMI you get 2 users as standard. So the idea is a local user and also 1 extra user. We also support a mobile client using the same sort of HTML5 browser capability, but now we're using a dedicated app. So we have iOS, iPadOS, Android, and there are Windows native apps which are available from the relevant app stores. This is ideal for mobile workers because they can display the Movicon graphics on their own local device, and again it's not using a local license, so we've got that same concurrent license capability which can reduce costs. The only issue with mobile clients is typically with a mobile phone, the screen is quite small, so you have to make sure that your screens are still viewable. You can pinch and zoom and you can zoom around and move around, but sometimes you might need to think about, is that really workable? And that can depend on what your screen design looks like. So you can use your original screens, but some users do create additional extra screens which are more appropriate for those mobile workers. Now, basic drivers are always included. So that includes OPC client, Modbus RTU and TCP, Emerson or what was GE Ethernet, Siemens PC adapter MPI, PPI, S7 TCP and TIA portal symbolic drivers, On1 Ethernet IP and FINS Ethernet, Rockwell or Allen Bradley Ethernet IB, and Phoenix Contact PLCI. They're included as standard. To be sure of what you get, you can contact Emerson or see the Software Experience Hub for the latest list. Now, typically we also include automation drivers, but depending on the license you use, they may be a separate driver option. But automation drivers includes Beckhoff TwinCat, B&R PVI, CodeAssist, Fanuc CNCs, Hilscher Field Bus using the CIFX cards, Mitsubishi FX and Q series, Panasonic FP Mutacol, Phoenix Contact, and Sire Data Mode. We also have then optional drivers including building automation, including BACnet, E&H Energy Manager, Connex KNX EI Bus and SNMP. We have telemetry drivers, which includes IEC 6104, IEC 62150 MMS, DMP3 and LAC bus. And there are IoT drivers, which include an MQTT driver, DataBoom IoT Cloud, and PubNub capability. We also have a dedicated database driver that can be used to extract or write individual values to a database, but you can also use historians and data loggers and scripts for that purpose as well. Now, because of the wide range of options, it can sound like it's quite complicated to quote Movicon, so I'm going to present some flowcharts which provide simple part selection to create your bill of materials. Here's what you need to know from the user. First of all, you need to know how many I/O tags there are, also known as points or variables. We call them tags. You need to know what protocol or protocols are required, and we can support multiple protocols at the same time. You need to know how many clients there will be, or is it just a centralized computer? And if there are clients, are they runtime clients or are they web or mobile clients? Do you need any options such as redundancy? Do you quote any editor nodes? If not, I would always recommend quoting an editor node as an option, and that could be in a separate quote, and that's for Dev4 part number along with the annual support package. But editors might not be needed. For example, with an end user, they might only be interested in the runtime nodes. Another option is that we can also add editors to a runtime client to turn it into an editing node as well. Does the user want to do energy efficiency or OEE analysis, in which case we can offer Pro.Energy and Pro.Lean. Optionally, we can also offer support and services, IPCs and panel PCs, and maybe you'll need power supplies as well, possibly switches, and of course we also support the PLCs and IO ranges. So you can refer to the product codes document for full details, or contact your pre-sales consultant team for additional support, and customer care can provide the actual quotation once you've determined what the part numbers are. And here's our flowchart. Step 1, choose the Runtime HMI SCADA server license and the relevant drivers you need. So first of all, you would start and then you would choose the license based on the IO tag count. So for example, if you know you need, say, 500 tags, you can choose part number RTCS4-F-500, and that covers you for the runtime client and server. That's what the CS means. 4 is the version number. Any Movicon 4 version would be licensed with that. F is for the default drivers, and of course 500 refers to the tags. This is runtime only, so you can use the editor, either Dev4 or OP4 Edit, to add on to that to create projects. And that includes a client. If you didn't need the local client, if you wanted server only, you could delete that C, so you could have RTS4-F-500, for example, for a server only with separate remote runtimes. Now, basic drivers are always included, so that includes OPCUA and Modbus and many of those PLCs. And by default, we support 2 simultaneous drivers at the same time, and there is a multi-driver option if you need more than 2 drivers. Remember, tag count is determined by the number of IO tags. We don't count internal or calculation or alarm tags as separate. It's just the number of IO tags that come from PLC devices that are counted. However, if you have an array, each element counts as an IO tag if it is connected to a PLC device. So no cheating. If you've got 500 tags, whatever type they are, however you want to configure them, if you've got 500 PLC tags, you need a 500 tag license. So on the right hand side here, we see the different driver options. So these are add on using the OPS4 part numbers. So if you want the automation driver package, you add that by adding OPS4-DVA, and then you also have to specify what size tag count you want. So we have 3 breakpoints. So 1K supports servers up to 1,000 tags, 20K supports servers up to 20,000 tags, and 100K that supports you up to 100,000 tags. So you add that on according to your server size. Again, as before, if you've got more than 2 drivers running simultaneously, you add the multi-driver option. If you need more driver packages, then you can add multiple driver packages. So we've got the facilities driver package, which is OPS4-DVF. You've got the telemetry driver package, which is OPS4-DVT. And then there's also the IIoT driver package, which is OPS4-DVI. And you can have multiple of those according to which one of those you need. If you need redundancy, then you can add the redundancy option. So this is OPS4-R, and again the X refers to the tag count of your base server. So for redundancy, you do need 2 or more up to a maximum of 4 identical servers. All those redundant servers would have identical licenses. All would have the redundancy option required. But as a price concession for each backup server, we give an additional 0.7 multiplier or 30% discount, so the backup servers have a reduced price compared to the main server. Here are some more options. Do you need OPCUA server? in which case add ops4-OUS. Do you need the alarm dispatcher, in which case add ops4-ALD. Do you need multi-session? Multi-session is running 2 or more projects on the same computer, in which case add ops4-MSE. And then do you need any client options? So for geographic maps, for the GeoSCADA option, you need to add OPC4, so C is referring to the client now rather than server. So for GeoSCADA it's OPC4-GS, and this must be added on each server or client where you will be viewing GeoSCADA. Same for 3D graphics, we've got OPC4-3D, must be installed on each server or client where you will be viewing 3D graphics. And we've got statistical alarm reports, which uses OPC4-ALS. Having specified the server, we can now specify the clients. So if you need additional runtime clients, remember RTCS4 includes 1 local client, but if you want remote or networked clients, you add RTC4. So that's just 1 part number. There's no user size on that one. RTC4 covers you for each computer where you want to review remote applications. And again, that's using the Windows presentation framework. If you want to add web clients, you can also add those using a combination of WB4 part numbers. And then we've got a choice of single, 5, 10, 50, 100 and 1,000 users. And also with those, each one of those also has a relation to the server tag size. So again, 1K, 20K and 100K. Now, web client licenses are concurrent. Each web client uses an available license from the server, but we only count those when the user is active. So you might have 1,000 users in total, but if only 50 people will be using the system at any one time, you only need a 50 user license. However, if a 51st user comes along, they will be rejected because the 50 users are already in use. Now, web client supports different modes, and you can either use server-side using Internet Information Services. That's restricted to 50 users because of the server-side processing, but it's also possible to do support on the client side using HTML5, and with this we can support a lot more users because the client side is doing the processing. Now, we do have a dedicated part number for developers, but it's also possible to add editor capabilities onto any runtime node, be that an RTSC server with client or an RTC4 license. To add editor activation on runtime, you would choose the OP4-edit part number, and you'd add that onto each license where you want to do editing. Dev4 is a separate editor. You can also use, if you've got a really budget application, you could potentially use the demo license. But the point of Dev4 includes the annual support, including upgrades, and also you don't have any nags. If you use the demo license, then it's limited to 2 hours runtime, and you also get a dialogue every 2 hours, which prompts you to buy a license, which can be quite annoying as you're going through your workflow because it can disrupt you from your development activities. We've also recently introduced a cut down version of Dev4 as well for smaller licenses and for web HMI type applications. If you're a solution provider or an OEM, we also offer an SP program, and I'll cover how support works in a later slide. Now, if you want to add energy analytics using Pro.Energy, you start off with your base Movicon.NExT server, and then you add our PEX4 part numbers on the activation of that existing license. So depending how many energy points you have, and each energy point could be an electricity meter, or maybe it's gas, water, steam, compressed air, or so on. But for each energy point, we have a different requirement of the number of counts. So we start off with 5 energy points or meters. Again, any combination of water, gas, electricity, and so on. So for 5 energy points, it's PEX4-5, and then we go up in increments. We can go 10, 25, 50, 100, 200, 500, 1000, and with a maximum of 2000. And there are breakpoints. So as you go with larger licenses, the cost per energy point comes down slightly. So if you've got large numbers, that can be more cost effective. Now, with Pro.Energy, as well as buying the PEX4, You also need to think about the license count of the base server. Each energy meter requires one I/O tag because we're assuming that the meter data is going to be coming from a device or from a PLC, and we use one tag. So for example, for an electricity meter, that would be kilowatts or kilowatt hours. So kilowatt hours would be your actual kilowatt hour reading, but we can also read kilowatts and we can integrate that over time to produce kilowatt hours. But either way, it's one PLC value, so you need one I/O tag for each energy point or meter, and that's on top of whatever your base system might be doing. Having said that, in many applications, you might already be reading that meter data from your PLC device, and you might already have that in Movicon, in which case you don't need those extra values. But just bear in mind, each meter point also requires an I/O tag for the actual raw data. Now for lean manufacturing, using overall equipment effectiveness, we count the number of OEEs. So typically one OEE is one machine or maybe one cell. And then for multiple devices, they normally need one OEE each. And then if you're combining OEEs, then that might be additional OEEs. So each time you need an OEE, you buy a PLX4 license, and then they go up in quantities starting at 1, and then we do 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, up to 100. Now the way the OEE license works is, again, this fits on your base Movicon.NExT SCADA license, but what you also need to do is you need to consider the I/O count again. And the way OEE works is we need 7 data points for each OEE, plus 1 extra for each additional downtime cause. So typically that's a minimum of 7 I/O tags per OEE, but as soon as you're recording downtime, then it works out at about 8. I would estimate a bit more. It depends on how many downtime reasons you've got, but I would assume 20 I/O tags for each OEE if you're not sure. So if you've got 1,000 OEEs that you want to monitor, then with 20 each, that's 2,000 tags that you need to allocate for in your base license. Again, they may already be being read, but they may not, in which case you need to add them. And the reason we have 7 tags needed is, we need to calculate whether the machine is running or stopped, whether the machine is available or not. We need to have all the downtime reasons. We also need to have the number of parts produced, the number of scrap items, and some other parameters as well, because we need all of those parameters for the OEE calculation. So it's a minimum of 8 I/O tags per OEE, but I would assume 20 if not sure, and you may need more depending on how many downtime reasons you've got. So having run through that flowchart, you will end up with a list of parts, and then it's quite straightforward for us to quote those parts. What you might also need to do, and this is something that's more an issue for us when we do the quotation, when we actually issue the licenses, we also need to know which computers each license will be allocated to. So what I would advise is when you're creating your bill of materials, what you would do is you would say, this is the key I need. So this would be a software key or a hardware key assigned to each machine. And then for each machine, specify what that license would include. So you'll have your server with its licenses. So there will be one or more parts for that server. You might have a redundant server, so there'll be one or more parts. Or because you've got the ops4, there'll actually be at least 2 part numbers for your redundant server. And then you would have your clients, and then they might also have their options. So to say which key is which, you could say, right, this is key 1, and this is server 1. This is key 2, this is my redundant server. This is key 3, this is my workstation 1. This is key 4, and so on. And that way we can make sure that when we issue the quotation, it's easy to convert into a set of licenses that then can be applied to your actual computer, and then that will allow you to authorize the different options you need. Of course, if you've only got one computer, then that's not required. We will just give you one activation code, which will authorize all of those. But as soon as you've got multiple codes, you need to think about which software and which functionality will need to be applied to each computer. So now let's talk about support. Our standard Movicon support contract is called Expert Application Support, and it has part number EA Support. So this is an annual support contract, and it's available with either 10 or 20 hours support per year. So the way you contact technical support is the same as the way our hardware works. and you can refer to our Emerson Customer Centre for contact details, but you get the option of phone, email or online case management. A point about that 10 or 20 hours, it is based around supporting application support. If you have an issue that's identified as a product problem, such as a non-compliance or a bug, then we don't count that issue against the contract time. So that contract time is very much about getting support on implementing the application, not necessarily about technical support for the product. If you do run out of hours, you can also buy additional hours as you need it. Now, if you buy Dev 4, Dev 4 is for developer, and that includes EA Support 10 for the first year, and then you can get an automatic renewal in subsequent years. But if you've got multiple developers, then you only need to buy EA Support 10 once, so you can use a different part number, Dev 4 greater than 2, and then that part number supports you for subsequent users without having to buy multiple EA Support 10s. We also have a solution provider program, and that includes Dev 4 and EA Support 10 for up to 10 users, and it's also possible to increase that number of 10 users. And then again, for subsequent years, you can purchase EA Support on an annual basis or just by renewing the subscription. You don't have to buy Dev 4, you can get EA Support as an end user, and that will give you product updates without purchasing a developer, and that might be useful if you've got Op4 Edit. So that Op4 Edit doesn't come with support, so that's where EA Support would come in. And the important point here is EA Support, Dev 4 and SP, these are quoted by Emerson as subscriptions, so customer care will quote those. Customer care also handles all of the renewals on those as well, so you get like an automatic renewal every year, and then you just need to submit your invoice against that renewal quotation, and then that will allow that continued operation of that contract. So that's quite easy to quote. It's just the part numbers involved, either Dev 4 or EA Support or solution provider program, and then everything else is handled by Emerson. Now, Movicon is a software product, so I'm going to give you some details of the additional hardware and software that may be required in order to run Movicon. You do need some hardware. Movicon runs very well on modern computers, including modern industrial PCs and panel PCs. It may struggle a bit on some of the older embedded type applications, so that's where HMI, web HMI would come in. But certainly with Movicon.NExT, I would say the minimum specification is an Intel Core i3 5th gen, or use an AMD equivalent, and you probably need for that a dual core 2 GHz CPU. So by today's standards, that's quite old. In these days, the recommended solution would be an 8th gen CPU. The 8th gen CPU is recommended partly because of the better performance, but also because of cybersecurity. So 7th gen and older have known cybersecurity issues. By using 8th gen, then the CPU core design is improved so that you know that the performance will be better and the cybersecurity is better. And the Core i5 also gives you a bit better performance than the Core i3. Or again, you could choose an AMD equivalent. Again, I recommend for recommendations for modern computers, quad core, 2 GHz plus. But again, these days, that's pretty much entry level for any sort of, even in industrial PC of even a few years ago. So that gives you very good performance without having to be extremely expensive. On the memory side, 4 GB is the absolute minimum. I'd recommend 8 GB for a client, or even bigger than that, 16 GB for a server. And if you can afford more, then buy it, because much better to have the memory now, particularly with some industrial PCs where the RAM is soldered. Better to have that RAM now than find out you need it later and you can't expand. Hard disk space, 4 GB is useful for the application and for your project, but you might need more if you're doing a lot of database logging. And with modern computers, you're probably using SSDs, so larger SSDs are preferred because these have a longer life. From a graphics point of view, most CPUs now have integrated graphics, and with an 8th gen or above, integrated graphics is fine. You can use a dedicated graphics card to boost performance, but these days, particularly as we approach 13, 14 and 15th gen CPUs, the integrated graphics are now getting very good. So you probably don't need a dedicated graphics card, but if you've got one, it won't hurt. Movicon needs an operating system, So the first thing you need for third-party software is the Windows operating system itself. So for any of the server or web HMI running on Windows, you need Windows 10 or Windows 11. You might say that Windows 10 is discontinued. That's not strictly true. Windows 10 is out of mainstream support, but you can still get extended support. And if you've got Windows 10 IoT long-term service channel, that's supported up till 2032. So we do support Windows 10 still. Windows 11 is supported. And on the server side, we support Windows Server 2016, 2019, 2022, and 2025. And if you're using a web client, then you would install and configure the Windows Internet Information Services. For Linux, for web HMI, we do support any core that uses .NET. So that includes Ubuntu, Debian, and Raspbian, and maybe some others. But you do need to install that .NET core on those distributions, and then you would need to install the core of the web HMI functions, and that would mainly be the deploy server, and then the core applications, and then we would download the actual application using the deploy server. Now, if you're doing historian and data logging, then you can use a database. I recommend SQL Server. SQL Server Express is free of charge, and that's very good for small applications. I say small, that supports a database size of up to 10 gigabytes, which can be quite good even for larger to medium-sized applications. But above that, you can use SQL Server Standard. SQL Server can be quite expensive, but many organizations already have a Microsoft Volume license, which includes the option for SQL Server. So at an IT level, SQL Server might not be a big additional cost. We can also use SQL Azure, which is a subscription in the cloud. And if you want low-cost databases or open source databases, we do support SQLite. We've got the capabilities to read and write data directly to a local file, which is what SQLite is based on. There's no database engine, it's very lightweight. We support MySQL, and that includes MariaDB, which is a fork of MySQL, which is optimized for embedded applications. And we support Postgres, including Timescale DB or Tiger data, which is ideal for time series data. We've also got the option to use Movicon 11 or maybe a third-party software driver if we have no Emerson driver available. So up until now, we introduced DMP3, for example, with Movicon 4.4. Prior to that, we could use Movicon 11 or we could use a third-party driver. There are still some strange drivers out there, and again, that might be where you use a third-party or Movicon 11 driver. But generally, for most applications, we do support all of the latest PLC protocols and many other protocols with no issues. So let's take a look at some example bill of materials to see how we would take some customer requirements and turn that into a list of parts. So here's an example for a standard machine level HMI. So the requirement is a panel PC with a full function HMI SCADA with 750 I/O tags, talking to a PAC Systems RX3i PLC and one additional third-party PLC using Modbus communications. It needs to be a server with local client. The operating system is Windows 10. It needs alarming, it needs SQL logging, and it needs reports. So this is a very straightforward one for us, because we can quote the RTCS4-F-1K Pro server with 1,000 tags. So the 1,000 tags is the next count up from 750. The RTCS4-F includes the Modbus and the OPC UA comms, and that includes your local client as well with the RTC part number. The S is the server. It includes the alarming, the logging, the reporting, all of that is included, so we can cover this requirement with a very simple one single part number. For options, you could include Dev4 editor on a separate computer. You could consider Op4 edit on the runtime server, which would give it editor capability. We can also offer EA support, that's included with Dev4, or you could offer the EA support as a way of offering upgrades for the RTCS4-F-1K server. And you could potentially offer a panel PC and a power supply as well, because this software will need something to run on, and Emerson can supply those as well. But very straightforward, the basic requirement is a single part number. Here's an example for a distributed HMI SCADA application. So the customer's asking for a server PC with full function HMI SCADA. They've got 2,500 I/O tags. Again, there's one PAC Systems RX3i PLC, or maybe there could be several, but we don't mind because it's a single driver instance. And then there's one or more third-party PLCs with Modbus comms. Again, we don't care really how many there are because it's one driver instance. So we've got 2 driver instances in total. Now what the customer also wants is 3 runtime clients. They want remote web clients. They want alarming, including SMS messaging this time. And they also want SQL logging and reporting. So our bill of materials for this is, first of all, we consider the server. So we can cover the server with RTS4-F-5K, and that's the Pro server only. So the reason is we're assuming that the server PC will be locked in a cupboard, so it doesn't need a local client. And 5,000, that's the next tag count up from 2,500. The RTCS4F, that also includes the 2 drivers, OPCUA and Modbus comms are included, and we can have 2 driver instances with multiple devices running at the same time. For the alarms, that's included, but we also need the alarm dispatcher option, which is required for the SMS alarms option. So we add on the OPS4-ALD-20K alarm dispatcher option. So OPS4 is an option for the server, ALD is the alarm dispatcher, and 20K because that's the next breakpoint up from the 5K server. For the clients, there's 3 runtime clients, so we would offer 3 off RTC4 runtime clients. And for the web client, I would offer 1 WB4-1, which is the single user web client package, and again 20K because that's the next breakpoint up from 5K. Options again could include Dev4, we could include OP4 edit on one of the runtimes, we could offer EA support, and again we could offer industrial PCs as the servers, panel PCs for the clients, and of course power supplies. Again, nice simple bill of material that meets all of the requirements. And from the point of view of thinking about the distribution of the licenses, you've really got 2 separate parts here. So you've got the server, which will include the RTCS4 part and the OPS4 part and the WB4 part. So that would be what was on your server license. And then you'd have 3 separate runtime client licenses. So there are effectively 4 keys that we would generate: the server key, and then the 3 runtime client keys, and then the server key that would include those 3 parts for the server functionality. And the reason we do that is, it's the web client. The web client, the server for the web client is installed on the server itself. So we're going to expand the system from the previous slide, and now we've got an additional device. So now we've got 3 driver instances. We've got the same number of clients. We've got alarming with SMS as before, SQL logging and reporting, but now we want to add OEE with 10 OEE recordings. So similar to before, we have the RTS4-F-5K, which is the server only. OPS4 MD, we need this is the multi-driver option because we've got more than 2 simultaneous drivers. Potentially, if we could convert the code assist driver to use OPCUA, then we wouldn't need the multi-driver option. But for 3 or more driver instances, we do need that multi-driver option. So there's that additional MD-20K part number. Because it's code assist, we also need to add automation drivers. So we add the DVA driver pack, which includes code assist. We've got the alarm dispatcher as before. We've got the web server as before. We've added the PLX4-10 Pro.Lean option, and then we've got the 3 runtime clients as before. So again, from a server point of view, you've got 1 server license, which includes the majority of those parts, because the Pro.Lean and the web client and the options, they're all installed on the server license. So that's your first key, and then you would have 3 additional keys, which would be your individual runtime clients. Again, same options as before: Dev4, OP4 edit, EA support, and of course, industrial PCs, panel PCs, power supplies, etc. But again, still quite a straightforward bill of materials. It's just that as we've extended the functionality, we're having to add some additional options to the server. So here's the last one: redundant server PCs with full function HMI SCADA. Each one is 2,500 tags, And in this case, there's a single set of devices based on RX3i PLCs using OPCUA communications. So there's only one driver instance this time. The client has asked for 2 clients using the Runtime client, and they want the standard functions of alarming, SQL logging, and reporting. So what we need this time now, we've effectively got 3 different license types. So there's the key for the primary server, and that includes RTS4, which is your server, and then it's -F-5K, that's your server only with 5,000 tags. And we have to add the redundancy option, which is OPS4-R, and we use 20K because that's the next breakpoint up from 5K. We then have a corresponding backup server, which is identical in parts to the primary server, but it's a separate key and it's priced at a 30% discount off of the primary server price. So 2 keys, primary server, backup server, and then for the clients, that would be an additional 2 keys or licenses, each consisting of RTC4, which is the runtime client. So again, quite straightforward, primary server, backup server, and then clients, and then options if you want to add them, and these are the same options as we had before. So again, quite simple to quote, and because we've got this part number arrangement, it's very straightforward. As mentioned, I would recommend splitting it up into your server and client type licenses, and in the case of multiple servers, list what each server needs, because the reason is that when we quote on that, we can apply that to the quotation system, and that makes it very easy to convert the quote to an order when the customer submits their purchase order. So it saves a lot of hassle later trying to work out which license goes on to which software key. So very straightforward, including even for redundancy systems, and having got that bill of materials that you've created, you could send that to our sales team or customer care team, and then they can produce a formal quotation for you.